Yo guys, I got a spark which I'm going to use to ignite the fire for a brand new episode of Schooled for Games show, where I take the battle classes from Skylanders Imaginators as a theme and make a video around said theme. So Skylanders Trap Team is notorious for having several villains, all of which are completely original for the game's development, so they all have unique designs that vary from one another. And because of that, they fit into battle classes quite nicely, just like the Skylanders that we've talked about preceding them in this series so far. And when it comes to the villains in Trap Team, just because they're bad guys doesn't mean they're bad guys. So naturally, they deserve the same treatment as the Skylanders have gotten previously in the series. So I'm going to go through every single one of these villains and put them into a battle class of their own. Now we're going to go through these per battle class, rather than going through these per element. And the battle class order is going to be the same as the order in which I went through the battle classes for each individual episode of the Skylander showcases. So without further ado, let's get into this, shall we? Starting with the Bowslinger class, we have for one, the only Cross Crow, our only Bowslinger from the whole of the Trap Team villain cast, based purely on his weaponry alone, since he wields a crossbow, which is a Bowslinger style weapon, so based on said weaponry, Cross Crow makes a perfect Bowslinger. Moving on to the Knight class, you wouldn't think these next two picks make for great knights, purely because, well, not many villains at all would make for great knights, since the tropes of heroism and courage aren't really abundant when it comes to the villains. But for Luminous, however, he possesses both of those tropes, I would say, since he's quite courageous, because when he's defeated, he actually runs toward the Vortex, which is an extremely brave thing to do, and at the same time, that's also honourable, since he's kind of acknowledging defeat in battle, and respects his opponent for being such a skilled fighter within combat. And those are definitely personality tropes of a knight, but better yet, Luminous possesses a armor, so aesthetically he also matches that of a knight. The only other battle class that he would suit is a quick shot based on his gameplay, since his lasers are very fast and accurate. But bearing in mind everything I just said, I definitely feel as though Knight is more befitting for Luminous. And then my second choice for a Knight is Shield Shredder, a much more controversial one. But just like Luminous, he possesses armor, so straight up he is a knight aesthetically. And not to mention, he has a shield-based thing. It might be a blade, but it still counts as a shield. So says the name Shield Shredder. And he charges in battle, he even charges into battle even. And so you wouldn't necessarily think a charge would be a knight move, more so a brawler move, but I do think it is a move of a knight, since first of all it takes courage to charge into battle, like what Shield Shredder does, but second of all it feels a bit like a jousting maneuver, which of course jousting is a traditional knight-based sport, so I feel like Shield Shredder is indeed worthy of the knight class. But moving on, we have the Sentinel class, and Gulper here is our only representative of said class from the Trap Team villain cast, and once again that's based on weaponry alone, since Gulper wields a trident that he uses to flip enemies over his head, which requires a lot of agility and skill with said trident, so for weaponry and how he utilizes it makes Gulper the perfect Sentinel. At that, we have Ninja class coming up next, which starts off with Nightshade, obviously, because he's sneaky, which is, of course, the trait of a ninja. And you can say the same with Taekwon Crow. He actually teleports in his boss fight to sneak around you. So that kind of sneakiness to said boss fight makes him a ninja. Plus, he also has ninja stars, so his weaponry is ninja-based. Even if he does have a sword, that you could always argue is knight-like of him. But really, Taekwon Crow's ninja stars are the main focus of him, especially when you go into his villain quest, since that's more of a projectile-based quest, so you're naturally going to be utilising ninja stars far more often. So the fact that the villain quest kind of emphasises your usage of the ninja stars just shows how important ninja stars are to Taekwon Crow's overall look. And not to mention, he also has the aesthetics of a ninja, you know, a mask, a ninja robe, So between how he acts in his boss battle and the emphasis on ninja stars, it does indeed make Typhon Crow a ninja. So moving on to the bazooka class, we start off with Chill Bill, who has a single gun, a pretty big gun at that, and it's also very powerful. It does sacrifice a lot of speed, but it's very, very powerful indeed. And it also targets single enemies to cause huge destruction from afar, so that makes Chill Bill the very definition of a bazooka. Then we also have Dr. Crankcase, who has a single weapon, which is more powerful and focuses more on range than what it does with speed or accuracy. Once again, that is a trait of a bazooka, so Dr. Crankcase fits this class quite nicely. Next up we have Brawlerus, which has a giant cannon, very traditional bazooka-based weapon there, and of course it might be slow, but it launches huge starfish even, which is very destructive, and even as mini starfish, they are pretty slow and not very accurate, but they are at least powerful, making Brawlerus a bazooka indeed. Then we have Troll and Thunder with one huge cannon at the front of it, which causes huge power and destruction from afar, making Troll and Thunder the perfect bazooka once again. Then we also have Shrednaut, which is a giant piece of machinery built to destroy. So its huge emphasis on destruction makes it a bazooka right out of the bat. Not to mention one of the characters actually has a bazooka which they fire at the enemies. So that makes Shrednaut a bazooka in my personal opinion. And then we also have Krankenstein. His arm kind of features like a gun, since it fires off huge gusts of air and also picks enemies up and launches them back out, a bit like Jetpack, just better. Then again, it's not exactly hard to get better than Jetpack. But point is, his arm is pretty huge, and because it functions just like a gun would, it does indeed make Krankenstein a pretty good bazooka. Then we also have Smokescreen, because he has a lot of destructive capabilities with that flamethrower, which he uses to destroy his enemies from afar, obviously. It's very slow, but that's made up for with power, as I just said. And not to mention, Smokescreen is also a pretty big explosives expert, with the fact that he's able to concoct such fiery explosions and things. So the kind of weapons mastery that Smokescreen has makes him a bazooka quite fittingly. Then we have Bombshell. Now, Bombshell doesn't have a gun per se, so he's not got a very traditional weapon, bazooka-style weapon even. However, his bombs are slow, but he's incredibly accurate with them from a big distance. And of course, they are very destructive as well, and it's within a bazooka's interest to cause destruction from afar. And he's also a demolitions expert, so that shows weapon mastery. And the most important part of a bazooka is to show said weapon mastery. So, in my personal opinion, despite the lack of a bazooka-style weapon, Bombshell is a bazooka still, because he has some very powerful bombs that cause great destruction from afar. Then we also have Blastertron, who has a massive gun that unleashes a huge blast with great range on it. But of course that sacrifices speed and even has to charge up just to be even more destructive. So of course Blastertron is a bazooka as a result. But at that we now move on to the Quick Shot class. Starting of course with Fredpack, because he can launch a multitude of rockets all at once. So the speed in which he launches these rockets and the accuracy they have make him a Quick Shot. Then we also have Mablob, since he launches a bunch of bombs all at once towards his enemies. You could say it's almost ninja-like of him, because it sets up a trap for the enemies to walk into, but the fact that he has just such a sheer amount of bombs which he launches at once with such great speed makes him a Quick Shot. And you can say the same for Lobgoblin as well. Once again, he is a bit strategic, since he has kind of like tripline based things which can trap enemies or force them into a corner, which of course is more ninja based than Quick Shot based. But at that, at the speed in which he throws said bombs and for accuracy if they have, makes him a Quick Shot, I would say, rather than a ninja. Then we have Sheep Creep, who's obviously a quick shot since he has 2 cannons, which he fires off very quickly with very intense accuracy. And then not to mention when he does his fluff explosion, he sends off fluff balls in all directions very, very quickly as well, and recovers very quickly. So the speed found within his corkscrew blasters, and the fact that there's 2 of them at once with pinpoint accuracy, makes Sheep Creep a quick shot. Then we also have Scrap Shooter, who fires off lots of pellets that deal very little damage, but they are very, very quick and very, very accurate, which is very much the very definition of a quick shot, mind you. But that leads us on to the next battle class, which is none other than the Sorcerer class. Starting off with Broccoli Guy, who has a staff. So right out of the bat, he has the weaponry of a Sorcerer. Not only that, though, he can also summon healing circles. So that huge emphasis on summoning makes him a Sorcerer. Then we have Chompy Mage, who summons Chompies and transforms into a different form. So that huge emphasis on spells and summoning servants, you could say, or at least just summoning creatures to do his own evil bidding, makes him a perfect sorcerer. Then we also have Mastermind, who might not have a staff unlike Broccoli Guy and Chompy Mage, but he does he's a bit more casual in battle and lays back to instead use spells that take over enemies. So for enemies that he kind of mind controls, he uses them to do his bidding for him. And once again, it's within the tropes of a sorcerer to be basically lazy and summon all sorts of different creatures to do their own bidding. And that's exactly what Mastermind does, making him his sorcerer. And not to mention, he also flies, which is very magical looking. And what's very important about a sorcerer is that they have that kind of magical feeling to them, such as levitation. So aesthetically, Mastermind even is sorcerer based. But moving on, we also have Golden Queen, who has a staff, which, right out of the bat, that staff makes her weaponry befitting of a sorcerer. Not only that, though, she also summons her little scarab turret thingies. So, the huge emphasis on summoning those makes her a sorcerer. And then we also have Dreamcatcher, who summons little vortexes and bow-like creatures. So, the huge emphasis on summoning makes her a sorcerer, just as it did with Golden Queen. And then we also have Bad Juju, who has a staff, so her weaponry is sorcery based, and she summons lightning down upon her enemies. So, her control of summoning for weather and her weaponry, those 2 things in combination with one another, makes her a sorcerer. Leading us on to our last sorcerer, I believe, that being Rage Mage, who once again has a staff, giving him the perfect weaponry for a sorcerer. He also levitates, so aesthetically he's a sorcerer as well. And he summons a huge stress ball for the sake not of offense, but more of defense. And once again, that kind of defensive playing style is very typical of a sorcerer. And then I almost forgot about Ice Cream, who doesn't have a staff, a bit like Mastermind, but she still does summon eyes. Even if she winds up spitting out the eyes, it's still some form of summoning something, even if it comes from inside of her, then going outside of her, which now sounds really gross when I put it like that. But point is, it's a form of summoning all the same, which makes her a sorcerer. And then we have Chaos as well, who summons Doom Sharks. He summons all sorts of elemental attacks. Keyword here is summons, and not to mention he's also a Dark Portal Master, which means he can summon his own evil minions and evil Skylanders, so on and so forth. So yes, if I was to sum up Chaos's moveset and how he fights you in several games, I would use the word summon. And of course, that's also the single word that I would also use to describe the sorcerer class. So you put 2 and 2 together, Chaos is indeed the perfect sorcerer. But now we finally move on to the next battle class. That being the Smasher class, starting us off with Cuckoo Clocker, since he has some very hard-hitting attacks. He's extremely slow, but his emphasis on pulverizing his enemies, like seriously, Cuckoo Clocker tries his darndest to absolutely smash his opponents. He doesn't want to just hit them, he wants to absolutely pulverize them. And so the emphasis on all of that makes Cuckoo Clocker a smasher. Then we also have Wolfgang, who has some very, very powerful yet slow attacks, and that's because Wolfgang wants to cause as much damage as possible. He's kind of in a befitting rage as he plays his music even, so that rage and the mindset of wanting to destroy everything in his path makes Wolfgang pretty much the perfect smasher once again. And you can say the same with Hutsuckle. Now, he's incredibly slow when it comes to his attacks, but they are so damn powerful. And once again, Hutsuckle even definitely has the mindset. I kind of combined Hutsuckle and mindset to make Hudset right there. But regardless, he has a mindset of dealing as much damage to his opponents at once as he possibly can. So the emphasis on the power that he can, of course, use to inflict maximum damage upon his enemies is a trope of a Smasher class character. Then we have Graveclobber, who has some very slow yet very heavy hitting attacks, which are aimed to absolutely annihilate his enemies at very close quarters combat, making Graveclobber the perfect smasher. Then we also have Buzzerbeak. He might be small, but man, does he have the mindset of wanting to destroy his enemies. He has the lust for blood, you could say, because he literally winds himself up. He lifts himself as high in the air as he can, only to smash himself down with such rage. The mindset he must go through whenever he's winding himself up is, I cannot wait to come down with such speed, to try my darndest to deal as much damage as possible. So it's that mindset to Buzzerbeak, that determination to get the strongest hit possible, that makes him the Smasher class. Then we also have Pinata, who once again has very slow melee attacks, but they are very, very powerful, bent on absolutely smashing up his opponents. He's a Pinata. You smash Pinatas. As a result, Pinata wants to smash you. Very befitting of a Smasher class. He just ironically kind of fits in here, you could say, because of, well, the things I just alluded to right there. And then we also have I-5. He pounds his fist upon the ground as hard and as fast as he can. You don't get any more smasher like that. Then you also have Fisticuffs, who launches his arm in the air only to bring it spiraling back down with the aim to deal as much damage as possible, once again making him a smasher. And now we move on to the last battle class, the Brawling battle class. Now, you might notice we skipped over Swashbuckler a few battle classes back, and that's purely because there are no villains befitting of the Swashbuckler class, besides Bad Juju, but even then, that's on an aesthetic level. When it comes to her gameplay and her weaponry, she's much more befitting of the Sorcerer, as I mentioned previously. But going into Brawlers right here, we have Slobbertrap, purely because there is no better battle class for him than Brawler. He aims to brawl with his enemies, you could say, based on his movement alone. Since he engages with them, kind of plays around with them in combat. And so the fact that he kind of plays around with his opponents makes him a Brawler. Then you also have Brawl and Chain. Brawl is literally in the name, so what other battle class would he fit in, right? But once again, he has some very good melee mastery to create for some very good melee combos. Then we have Bruiser Cruiser, whose movement is very brawler based because he kind of like moves into his opponents, gets a few melee hits in, moves back out again, creates for some sort of combination between all of the opponents he fights, so that's very much a brawler. Then we also have Chompy right here. He charges forward at opponents. You could call him a sorcerer as well, since he summons his fellow Chompy companions. But because of that charge right there, I do define him more as a brawler, because he kind of plays around with his enemies as he fights them. And the movement style is that of a brawler, because once again, it's kind of like playing around with his enemies. He's kind of out there to welcome them into the battle, to say, come on, approach me, and then he kind of lunges at them melee base, because, you know, he's small, he's cute, you wouldn't think he'd be much of a threat, so you come in close, and it turns out he's just playing with you, because then he brings out all sorts of melee based trouble for you. So that's why Chompy is a brawler, because of his play style. And you can say the same for Bone Chompy as well, since the two are effectively carbon copies of one another. But that leads us to Chomp Chest, who also has a charging base ability, just like Chompy, and he's a treasure chest as well, making it even more playful for his opponents who would engage him thinking he's a treasure chest, and then he lunges out and starts doing all sorts of melee combos that they cannot escape out of, making Chomp Chest a perfect brawler. Then we have Tussle Sprout. Now this guy's definitely a brawler because he can combo his Acid Peas with his Poison Cloud, so that then, you know, he has his peas behind him, he starts bringing in his Poison Cloud, forcing enemies back into his acidic peas, causing all sorts of different combinations within close quarters combat, making Tussle Sprout a perfect brawler. Well, I won't say perfect brawler, he just isn't befitting of any other class, which is why he's here, really. And we also have Chef Pepperjack, who's a brawler literally because he gets up close and personal with his opponents to brawl with them, to create different combos with them, melee based of course, and once again he charges into battle, just like the previously mentioned Chompy as such, playing with his opponents, you could say, forcing them to kind of become a part of his combo that they cannot escape out of. And then our final villain of the video, we have Grenade. Once again, you would think he is a sorcerer since he summons cute little companions, but I'd personally call him a brawler since he goes into combat to go as close to his opponents as possible, and right when they think they're safe, boom! His melee attacks absolutely destroy them. And once again, it's a very playful style of his, because he's kind of inviting the enemies to come close. Look at him, he's just a tiny little bomb. What's he going to do? Oh, he's going to cause a lot of explosive fire against you, which could also make him a bazooka, I guess. But the fact that he doesn't actually fire anything from opponents, and he doesn't use any sort of his destructive capabilities from afar, doesn't really make him be fitting of the bazooka nor for summoner class, or for sorcerer class even, that I mentioned previously. So that's why he is here as our final brawler and our final villain of the video. So I want to thank you guys so much for watching. I'll be seeing you in the next one, but until such a moment arises, peace.